Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Vasily Krysov-Cast, the second Battle of Kursk, and you'll see why it's called that very shortly. Now, this video is going to be a bit different from the other ones that you've seen previously in my series. Firstly, Red Dragon, new version of the game, very nice indeed, a general improvement, but if there's one issue that I think is a problem there is that it really shifts the focus onto light infantry, helicopter rushes, and sort of gimmicky shit. Like, it seems to, whenever I play a vanilla match of the game, I just see endless amounts of air spam, artillery, and it feels like your forces just kind of exist to only take over the blasted and shattered remains of your enemies. Now, obviously, you can't just air spam or artillery spam your way to victory, but I feel that there's this massive imbalance with the ratio of frontline fighting to support assets. So, to fix this, I've decided to take matters into my own hands, and a few of my friends have also joined me in this effort, and we have started making a mod for the game called Uralgraznomod, which is the mod that this match is actually being played under. And it really shifts the focus onto a bit more, tracked tanks, IFVs sort of focus, because you need to have a bit more firepower to really get ahead in the new version of this game. Now, the mod kind of initially started off as a sort of proof of concept for some tank changes that I'd suggested previously to the game developers, but that's somewhat been superseded because we started off for, okay, yeah, we'll just show this off, see that it works, but then we ended up just going, hey, stuff it, let's just actually make what we want to see be played. So it's now actually expanded into much more than just a tank mod. We've also changed up infantry, aircraft to a degree, due to the way that we've also changed up the anti-air ranges that you'll see plenty of in this game. And we're also soon going to be working on revamping artillery a little. But that's very small tweaks that we're going to be doing there, because in general, artillery I think is pretty much fine. So, the reason why we want to do all this is because I feel that the game just plays so much better when tanks are a main feature of gameplay, because they are the most tactically deep unit in the game. Frontal armor, side armor, rear armor, rate of fire, morale state. They can actually move around to take account for changing conditions of the battle. They're a bit more resistant to artillery and air power. It just allows for more fluid gameplay when you can actually see them in significant number. But as we will see in this match, it isn't a tank-only game. You'll not see just T-72s endlessly grinding on the faces of Jaegers and other infantry. Infantry still have an excellent role to play in this match. Now, in this match, we have on Blue 4 two very well-known ranked players, Daywalker and Slexer, who are actually making a competitor mod, the Steel Kings mod, that sets out to do sort of the same thing that we've done, but in a different way. And I'm sure you'll be able to find their forum thread if you're a bit more interested in finding out what their ideas are. And they're paired with two people, Downright Awful and Boxeroo. And on red team is myself, my friend Shan Revan, Nick, and Scanny. Now, this actually kind of creates a bit of an interesting dynamic for this match, because it means that we had pretty much two players on each side that are pretty decent at the game, and in communication, I can only assume, through TeamSpeak or Mumble, and you've got two other players who knows, maybe they were on TeamSpeak with each other, perhaps not. Because Scanny, Nick, Downright Awful, and Boxeroo are all friends, and we didn't want to have a match where it was just Daywalker, Slexer, me, and Shan on one team and them on the other, because then that would just be a horrible stomp. So, on with the match itself. As we can see, SAS, as always, in the middle, but they haven't totally shut down our competing airdrop because there isn't one. We're making mostly a ground push with tanks and IFVs, because what we've done is Sean's on the left, Nick's on the right, and me and Scanny in the middle. Now, I will point out at this point that Scanny has actually only got a Category B tank deck, while I've got a Category A one, and we actually end up seeing some quite interesting dynamics there, because a Category B force in this match actually ends up being quite useful, because he provides basically all the mass tanks, a lot of T-72As, a lot of T-80s, T-64Bs, while I provide the more high quality ones like these T-72B 89s, T-80Us and T-72BUs. But I also make use of the lighter, more cheaper tanks as well. Now, one thing to kind of note here is Markovich, if you want to have a look at this replay yourself later on, hero of the Soviet Union. Lasts for a good 30 minutes of the match and gets huge amounts of kill. However, things on our right are not looking good, as we have Slexer coming up against Nick, and Nick's just basically getting stomped into the ground. So this actually means that whilst we end up actually winning quite well in the middle in Foxtrot, me and Scanny, it means that we have to sort of hold tight in Foxtrot rather than pushing onwards and have to bail out Nick on our flank. Because if we had lost Echo at this stage, we would have been absolutely screwed. It also would have been nice if Shan Revan had actually deployed his command infantry already. But since we end up holding Foxtrot for a majority of the match, it's not so much of an issue, because we get that constant points ticks in our favour. And we can only be thankful that Blue 4 left India uncapped for some reason. So here we have Daywalker basically all clumped up and somewhat screwed, because now he's getting it pincered in a classic 90-degree attack where there's a flanking force shooting at his side armor, and he can't, and he's just basically stuck in a damned if he does, damned if he does, damned if he don't, because if he turns to face whichever threat is bigger, then he's just exposing himself to the other clump of forces. So my tanks here, only 2 of them, but exerting pressure, and this Challenger 2, oddly enough, is actually felled not by these T-72/89s, and in fact is killed by a mass cannon salvo by these when it exposes its side armor to them. And on the right, very much Nick needing a rescue. And we can also see that Downright Awful is preparing for a little commando action on Charlie, which I'll focus on later. Damn it, Sean, deploy your command vehicle already, fuck. So, with us successfully holding Foxtrot, we've now decided to... I tell Ascani at this point over chat that he should hold on to Foxtrot, and I go and pull Nick out of the fire. Now, in hindsight, what we should have done was to actually push forward a little and take this crossroads and town here, because that would have allowed us to have far more pressure and give us a lot more ground to trade for time in later battles of the game. However, the issues which I would have with actually moving forward to this area here is that it means that we're a lot more exposed to scouting, sniping, and harassing artillery fire for when we're trying to move up forces into this area, because the flanks here and here are definitely not secured, and it resultingly means that we're sort of out on a limb here. It's a salient point, and salient points is always a good place to attack, because you can get an extra 2 or 1 flanks in which to pressurize the enemy rather than the frontal sector. So, whilst it would have been kind of nice, on the other hand, it means that we can be a little bit more conservative with our forces here. So, yeah. Pros and cons. Now, I send my T-72Bs to sort of rescue the day here, and some Hinds to also kill off all these light riflemen and rifleman 90s. Nick sends his own as well. So Shan's on our flank on the left here, which is very secure. It's a good thing to have him there because it means that now he's basically free to sort of contribute his forces to any hotspot that's needed on the map. That's one of the other things that we've noticed, is that it's actually now possible to really shift your forces around on the map because everything's a tank. Tanks are fast, they're well armored, and they can actually sort of have some inertia to them when you have them in numbers. So it means that supporting your friends in a match can be done with more than just air support and artillery, which is quite nice. And this little commando action gets underway, and it could have really screwed us, but we rather fortuitously, totally randomly called in the right kind of reinforcements to the front that also were a good choice for crushing this little insurrection here. So Ryusas shoot up some things and get killed. T-72s show they're well armoured and can take the pain. And we send forward some Hinds to get their Afghanistan on and murder some dudes in the mountains, and then some things toting stingers. These Tunguskas really help taking out these AHs, these Lynxes. And when these Lynx 3s come around, they get dismulched. Now, that's a problem. Something that we should have actually really anticipated was that we needed to account for some flank security here, because on this section of this map, this huge open plain is just such a typical place for people either up to this way or down to this way, sending helicopter special forces in order to disrupt the enemy, because it's just a huge benefit if you can even take away attention from the front line, because it often takes far more effort and cost to secure against a commando action than it does to actually start one. So if they had actually managed to keep that HQ section alive and kill off our command vehicles in this area, we would have been, as they say in England, proper fucked, governor. But thankfully tanks saved the day, and Hinds. Now, another thing I'd like to sort of point out to this match, so that you're primed to kind of keep an eye out for it, is that we make amazing use of rocket artillery in this match. Not to kill things, but simply just for panicking and disruption of attacks that they try to make on Foxtrot. Because these Urgans, I was sort of like, when Red Dragon came out, I was just like, well, they don't really do much, they're not that good. But then in this match, huge fan now. They really saved our asses many a time in this match, just simply because being able to just on demand say, okay, everything in this area is now panicked and just screwed. They're stunned, they cannot do anything. And this is something that we use to great effect, where we'll just place it in the middle of an attack and it's basically made useless, and it allows our forces on the ground to successfully counter push and save the day. Now, Scanny sort of sends forward some tanks here to kind of do a bit of a probe, but which is rather curious because he had his own. Where are they? Well, he had... there they are. He had his own grads here, so what he should have done was actually send forward the fire from the grads in this area, because then that would have actually allowed him to just kind of push into this area and to seal club these Challenger, Leclerc, and these MBT-70s to death without risk. And here comes my Urgan strike now. Now let's watch what happens. See, calm, 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 shaken, shaken, panicked. This entire little clump of forces here, except for this Johnny-come-lately, is now panicked and made useless. So if we had some more forces here, we would have been able to actually push on this point and just seal club those enemies to death. And that's hellishly useful as well. Well, on the right we can see that Nick's somewhat more consolidated now, and is now going to be focusing on building up his own defences again. Now, one thing which I will take as criticism towards Nick is that he doesn't really do much to create pressure on Slexa here, because that means that Slexa is now free to contribute all the forces he wants for the effort of taking Foxtrot, which does lead to quite large tank battles. Hence why I'm calling this the Second Battle of Kursk. Because one thing that I would say that Nick should have done was just simply to buy a few clumps of T-64As, T-72As, cheap, good infantry to support tanks, and then just simply have infantry walk up to these blocks, because the supporting fire of those tanks would have been able to allow them to push off the enemy from this initial row of buildings, and then the infantry, his own motor strelky, could occupy it. Because by not contesting this little corner here, causes us some small issues later on. And I have to, once again, come in and save his ass with some tanks. Another good thing about this mode, however, is now that tanks can be used in numbers, it's now actually possible to sort of build up a significant armoured reserve that you hold away from your front lines in order to save them from the worst of artillery and air support. So when the enemy launches their attack, you sort of let them grind themselves down, get panicked and get disrupted, and then you send it forth your own clump of tanks that you've kept in reserve in order to clear them out. Because if there's one thing that really destroys an attack, which has become bogged down, is a sudden shock force of fresh reserves moving in to really push their shit in. So that ends up actually what's happening. The kind of dynamic is that Scanny contributes most of the picket forces in this area in Foxtrot itself, while I actually keep my more higher quality units around the back and sort of counter push and counter attack once the enemy has reached the end of their row. So here we're going to be seeing the first little probing attack by Boxer, Daywalker. No Slexer in this one. I thought there was here. Anyway, so 2 Leclercs, Challenger, some AMXs, and this forest here is occupied. And looking at what we've got here, you'd think we'd be kind of screwed. But we managed to fight. Because here comes the Urgan. 2 of them, in fact. This opening flank here, AMX 10Ps, Leclercs. Oh look, they've now been made useless. This one's a bit calm though still, but he isn't going to really do much. And then this huge clump of infantry and forces in here, panicked, worthless. Now, Foxtrot in the middle here actually has some rather interesting dynamics, because for pushing into this area, you need to necessarily, you actually have to, by definition, expose your flanks, because it's quite easy for the enemy to have picketing forces here, 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 and here. And then the enemy actually has a backstop region here and around here, which stops you from pushing too far. So huge blowout breakthroughs are actually not possible, but it is allowing a lot of bite and hold tactics, because on our side we can kind of attack and push into here, put a command vehicle down, they can come and do the equivalent on this side and hold it. And also, due to the way these forests are placed, it means that you have this sort of small Thunderdome no man's land in the middle. Oh, and that reminds me, another thing that we've done is change up the command vehicles. Guess how much these BMPs are? 40 points. So, for getting a command vehicle onto a dangerous spot is no longer so much of a huge investment, and I think it is a much better thing for gameplay, because it means that the actual value of a command vehicle is in its inherent function, not simply because it's a massive point sink. Because if there's one thing that absolutely shits me about Conquest, is the propensity of people to just kind of sit back and try and artillery snipe out your limited command vehicles, because, you know, just randomly sending artillery into a backfield location is really contesting a point. What we want to see happening, and is what we do see happening, is command vehicles being used as a part of an attack in order to make a bite and hold and to contest a zone for either neutralizing points bleed or for creating it with the enemy. Which is what's happening here. Daywalker's sending forward a Chieftain Mark 10 and he's going to place it around here from memory. See? Nick's just sort of sitting here and just not really doing much. And however, I do notify him that he's got this coming down on his bucks and he manages to dodge that. It is just a crying shame that he's put no pressure at all on Slexa. Because, hey look, he's now contributing forces into Foxtrot. So now me and Scanny are at a bit of a disadvantage for the balance of forces that the enemy is putting in towards these attacks. Now, this grad strike by Scanny, you might look at it and just think, oh, why is he just dropping it here on this crossroads? There's nothing there. It's actually a sort of smart move once an attack has actually sort of been opened, because this is a crossroads and is where typically a lot of attacks actually come through. So having this sort of disruption artillery strike where the enemy's coming through can often cause a sort of reinforcement group to be demoralized and screwed up before it even hits the field, which can be quite the little benefit. Once again, we're really on the ropes here, and you'd think that Blue 4 are about to push us off, but, well, we've got some tricks up. We have some tricks up our sleeves. However, I will say is that I think I have put these long-range missile systems ranges a little too high, because I've actually set these Hawks to having 7 kilometers range, which actually allows them to reach all the way out to here. So I think I might be toning that down just a smidge. Because the idea that I had with them is that I wanted it to be possible for you to actually make an attack and for it to have a significant amount of space in which it's able to push ahead under your anti-air umbrella. Because one of the things that really is actually stopping sort of mass attacks that we like to see happening is the fact that you have people basically sending in one bomber per platoon that's actually making an attack, which is just stupid. It just makes it impossible for somebody to really make headway, and as matches get larger, it becomes even worse of a problem. So, by boosting up AA, I think it's a good thing, because it's now meant that an air attack is no longer your solution to every single problem that you face. Yep, and here's Daywalker telling Slexa to make use of the little opening here that Nick's left. Oh, and in response to the commando action, we've set up a nice little picket line here, so nobody's going to get around to us, Governor. Now, in the middle here, we can actually sort of see the importance of recon, actually, with these Recce team and the Razvedkas on their respective flanks. Because, looking this way, wow, that actually didn't really see shit. But, for us, we can see all this sort of stuff going on here with this one small Razvedka team. So, being able to actually see attacks, work out where they're going, and have the enemy walking into their fire, into your fire rather, is a huge thing. You really need to win the recon war. And once again, here comes the rocket artillery. Panicked, made useless. And this is especially a good idea to be doing to these Chieftain Mark IIs, which are being spammed by Daywalker, is because their base rate of fire is only 6 rounds a minute, so 10 seconds between each shot normally. That goes up to 40 seconds once it's panicked. They become essentially useless. And here I am doing a bit of a counter push here with my tanks. Markovich, you hero. So here we have the T-80U and T-72-89 being used in a rather dangerous fashion, but if there's one thing that we kind of need to do is kind of push them off this little corner area here, and they're the forces that we have there. So, as you can see, Challenger's panicked. He's only got one shot off now. Now he's just going to basically sit there being useless, and now that his optics have been taken out, these guys are free to push up. I don't actually manage to kill that Challenger 2, I believe, but the fact that we end up pushing them off this corner because of it is what allows us to sort of restore the situation here. Nick putting a little bit of pressure on this town here, but it's just simply not enough. Though I would like to point out that with our AA changes is that we actually haven't done anything to anti-helicopter ranges or prices in general. So what we're actually seeing in the mod is a lot more use of helicopters with ATGMs because, hey, they're the best and most flexible means of responding to an armored attack. For instance, when was the last time anyone really saw an Apache longbow? With the map, with the mod, I'm seeing them a lot more often than I ever used to because having 16 Hellfire Cs is now a huge thing and allows you to actually kind of entirely destroy an attack on its own under, you know, good conditions. And you actually see a little bit of that in this replay of me making good use of some hinds to sort of counter enemy pushes that come in. Narrowly dodge that attackums. Now, Downright Awful has this big clump of Challenger 2 and, well, other Challengers and Chieftains that he doesn't really seem to do much with. He's too careful with them. Like, whenever it has a chance to really be bold and actually do something with them, we end up doing some small counters to it, and then he just wimps out. He punks out. Like, running away from these hinds, it's just laughable because those Cocons against the Challengers are only going to be doing 1 point of HP each, and even against the Chieftains it's not going to be too fantastic, so it's not really possible for those hinds to really stop that attack. And as you can see here, Nick's got nothing. So if Downright Awful had actually been a bit bolder, he could have actually kind of pushed into here, and we would have been really screwed by this. But I think that's more of a case of people needing to actually adjust to the mod, where they sort of still have this expectation from the vanilla, whereupon, oh, I've got this big blob of tanks, I have to absolutely babysit this stuff because it's just so hugely expensive. Now you can actually make sort of more marginal attacks, I guess you could say, where things are risky, but the payoff can be quite possibly big. Could quite possibly be large. So, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Now, after that battle, both sides are sort of pulling back, licking their wounds, and building up for another big attack. And managed to snipe out that M1A2 quite nicely with flank shots. Thinking that he had moved up some infantry into this forest line, I started shelling the shit out of it with my Gvoznikas. That's actually something I'd like to point out here, is that at the moment Red 4 base artillery is in a bit of a shit state, because your only good piece is the Gvoznika. Like, it's actually hilarious how much better the M109s are over the 2S3 Akatsias. Because the rate of fire on the Akatsias is just lower for some reason, which I cannot discern, which really hampers their use. So one thing that we're going to fix with the mod, and hopefully I can get Eugen to fix in the game itself, is to give them a slightly better rate of fire so that they can be on equal terms. Oh, and I'd like to point out that the base Akatsia costs more than the base M109, even though the M109's better in pretty much every way. Go figure. Those goddamn AS90s and A-off-1s are just constantly shelling us and providing disruption. Because that's one of the bigger things for artillery, which I kind of liked back in air-land battle, was that it wasn't a sort of... It is your attack. It's something that you use on a position until it's cleared out, and then you just sort of move in and pick up the shattered pieces. In air-land battle, it was a sort of enabler for an attack. So it would disrupt an area for your ground forces to actually push in and take, which is something which I'm hoping that we manage to preserve in our mod. Because if there's one thing I don't want to be doing is accidentally buffing up artillery to being this ultra-powerful thing. So just going to speed things up a little. And this is also where some rather cheesy tactics starts to be employed by Slexer and Daywalker, where they start sending empty transport helicopters and supply helicopters around this area trying to find out where we've got our command vehicles hidden so that they can artillery them or airstrike them. Now we see that this is obviously happening, so we call down artillery on it, and then I just move in some T-72As to clear that area out, along with some infantry. Now they've built up for a big attack here in the middle. Huge clump, and here we go. Boxer contributing, along with Downright Awful, Slexer, and Daywalker. All four players on Blue 4 are trying to push us off the point here, because at 18 minutes it's now or never to take the initiative again. So we let them come to us. I sort of get my Urgans firing on concentrations to disrupt them, because that's what really helps us in this attack, is just turning entire clumps of enemies into demoralized jelly. And in this attack, just goddamn it downright awful. If this clump of chimeras, challengers and chieftains had kept pushing down this flank here, they would have absolutely screwed us, because we would have been forced to deal with too many things at once. Having all your the other 3 players just pushing on the middle point here, and if you just charge down here, we would have just been absolutely screwed. But he just sort of pulls back and just doesn't really do much. Fortune favours the bold, I guess. So, bite and hold successful. They've managed to get a few command vehicles in on the action. We've spotted it, however, so we'll be dealing with it shortly. But they've got another one, spare in reserve, ready to move up in case it's needed. Which is another thing which I like about reducing the costs of command vehicles so much, is that you can actually you can double up on them. You can now actually have enough of them in reserve so that losing 1 or 2 is not a huge deal for a point attack. But it's obviously not something that you want to keep doing, because you've still only got limited amounts of them. So Nick's sending over some T-72BUs, contributing to defense, because if we don't counter this push quite hard, we've lost it. And things really get quite contested here in the middle. So let's swing around for a better view of the action. Shan's Nonas join in on the fighting. I've actually noticed in this match that those Nonas are actually quite nice, getting point fire on targets in a fast and flexible manner. Quite useful. Especially for this sort of punctuated mobile warfare where units will temporarily stop in tree lines or in cover, and you can just quickly smack them around with support fire to disadvantage them for the next little clash. Now, the Hinds here get in on the action just using their rocket pods, just simply to stop the enemy from pushing forward and taking this little line of forests. And the T-72s here, making use of their own cannons for self-defense. And here comes a Strike Master group. Napalm trying to disrupt what's going on here. However, air defences manage to shoot them down before they can do too much. Definitely on the ropes here. But here comes the rocket artillery to save the day. Because I just called it down on this line here, because that's where I expected most of the enemy to be. Yep. Worried, not as good as panicked, but it means that when they actually do get into a fight, they're at a starting disadvantage, and they'll quite quickly drop down to panicked. And here comes the next clump of artillery fire, right down on these chieftains. That would have been a huge problem for us, and they've just been turned into useless jelly, and they just get seal clubbed to death by mine and Scanny's tanks. And here comes some Black Hawks trying to do the suicide scout, get shot down, which is kind of annoying because they end up actually using up the missiles from my Buck M1 here, which fails to then shoot down this SEM. But you can't have everything, I guess. So, as we can see with our Eye of Allah point of view, we've sort of now taken the initiative back from Blue 4 and are now counter-pushing on their demoralised forces. Which brings me to another point, is that attackers now need to actually have active reserves for their attacks, so that once the initial probe has been blunted, they've got a fresh reserve ready to immediately throw into the fray to counter enemy counterattacks and to add on to the attack, so that the first echelon of forces can sort of consolidate, get their bearings again, and be combined for the next wave of attacks. So these challenges, getting resupplied, getting refueled, because if there's one thing that you don't want to have happen is run out of fuel. That's how I lost one of my T-80Qs. He ran out of fuel, sat there, and then just got artilleried to death. What a shame. Here comes the attackums to take out the muck. Boom. So we're being quite conservative with our counter pushing here because we've actually got the advantage, as you can see on the right here with the points, and we don't want to sort of shoot our bolt too early and use up forces that we need to just hold position, because if in the last 10 minutes that we need to do is just merely hold our points lead over the enemy, and if we can maintain that, when we've won. There's no need to get risky. But that said, smashing enemy forces when we can is obviously a good idea. Another thing we've done is the T-80. They're now 50 points and they're pretty great to use, which is probably something nobody ever thought would ever be said. And it's actually kind of funny because we had them at 55 points initially and everyone still kind of looked at them sideways and went, eh. But as soon as we put it to 50, everyone loved them. They started getting put into lots of decks. So there's some interesting value judgments going on there, I think, where you have to be really careful when it comes to pricing a lot of units, is that even just a difference of 5 points can make the difference between something being useful and not being useful in the eyes of players. So again, they're trying to push us off this little forest here in order to put a command vehicle there. Because if they'd combined an attack on Echo actually with an attack on Foxtrot, that would have actually probably left us worse off than having gone all in to Foxtrot. Because that would have required us to stretch our resources on two fronts, rather than sort of just concentrating everything that we got into this one area between here and here. And I actually have to kind of say, later on in the match, Daywalker keeps trying to just spam out these Chieftain Mark IIs. That might be a viable tactic to do with, you know, chieftains in the vanilla meta, but it's really not a thing that you can do here in Uralgraznomod, because you're going to be running into slightly better tanks that will absolutely just shit all over them in nearly equivalent numbers. For instance, those Chieftain Mark IIs, 25 a pop, and a T-72A is 35. So the numbers of those kind of competing tanks are going to be very similar, but that slight quality edge that the T-72As have over the Chieftain means that they will win those battles. Unless, of course, you change the condition through artillery or airstrikes or what have you. But, you know, from just a pure tank-on-tank comparison, it means that doing sort of just cheap chaff mass attacks is not really an option, because there's now all these medium, just sort of in between the high end of the shelf and these low chaff tanks, which exists to just simply ruin their day, such as the T-80, the T-64B, and, you know, things like the Leopard 2, the M1IP, and so on. Now, towards the end of this battle, my side at least starts really running low on supply. We're just down to fumes, and we basically have to just call in one last MI6 to sort of resupply my Gvoznikas and my Urgans partially. But that ends up being a good thing because it allows us to disrupt their last-ditch attempts to attack. And here they come. Just look at that blasted ground. So again, we see artillery sort of not making much in the way of direct kills, but the simple disruption effect that it's having on all these chieftains is worth its weight in gold. Because it is the major part of this attack, these chieftains, and just turning them into nothing is just huge benefit. Damn, was that an unlucky artillery hit, right on the roof. But, as you can see, last 7 minutes of the match, even if they were to take this, at best they could manage a draw, and that just simply doesn't happen. So, I'm probably going to now kind of have a bit of a chat about why I think this match was a really good one. I think this was a very good match for showing off the mod, because it shows that using tanks are now viable. Infantry is still a very important thing for the appropriate terrain. For instance, Royal Marines on the hills here, getting in on the action. Infantry on the right here, fighting in towns and in forests. So, letting tanks be kings of the field is allowing for this sort of mobile gameplay where we see push, counter push, and then sort of phased attacks going back and forth. There's a bit of push and pull to the gameplay, which I don't feel really exists when it's mostly down to a few tanks, World War II for surplus, and a whole lot of like cheap infantry and APCs and everything, because you just don't, you simply just don't have the toughness to exist in anything other than these oases of cover that are cities and forests. This also has a disproportionate effect upon making artillery hugely viable in terms of disrupting and destroying enemy positions, which leads to even more static gameplay because it means that an attack can be stopped by artillery. I do not understand how some people don't see this, because say for example what's going on here, they have to push through here and here. People say that you cannot hit an attacking force on the move, which is bullshit, because it's a case of just simple prediction of just saying where does the enemy need to go, and you just simply put an artillery strike between that point and where they currently are, and you'll start hitting their forces on their way there. And that completes what you're trying to do, which is stop them from taking more ground. So here we send forward some MiG-29s, but due to the anti-air presence, they all get shot down. However, I'm kind of not having a problem with that, is because there's defenses in place against this. There's anti-air. Like, one would not toss their forces across a field which is full of ATGMs on the other side and then just go, oh, my stuff just got sniped, what bullshit. Like, attacking with air should be an opportunistic thing in my view, rather than just being a default thing that you can do. If you want to attack a defended position with air, you need to take steps to mitigate the enemy defenses, such as SEAD and artillery fire on likely SAM spots, which I feel would be a good value proposition for rocket artillery, because you can use them to set down large areas of panic, stun, just before an airstrike is launched on the myriad launch locations that you can suspect are going to be used, and that would allow your aircraft to get through. Because, don't forget, AA is mostly guided now, so just making it so that they are panicked means that they will reduce their rate of fire, and that negative 50% to their chance to hit, combined with good ECM, basically makes them waste ammo. At that point, the defenders are actually probably better off turning them off so that they don't waste supply. And here comes an example of how you can actually make an airstrike later in the game with the mod is that you cannot just do it this sort of drips and drabs, sort of piecemeal 1 or 2 planes sent forward. You have to send them forth in a big group in order to complete what you want to do with that, which they end up doing, dropping napalm on this thing, absolutely disrupting one of our defensive points and forcing all our command units to be clumped up into this narrow band here. If they had combined that with a attack-em strike onto the back area here, which wasn't covered, we would have been really screwed. However, by that time, they'd run out of supply, just like us, so shoulda, coulda, woulda. Oh, and we've also made spags cheaper. Those base shilkers, the 4v1s, they're now 20 points. They're quite nice, especially for soaking SEAD and for just providing Johnny-on-the-spot anti-aircraft fire. We've done the same for Vulcans, by the way. And Vulcans have actually been moved to the vehicle section, so you can actually sort of make use of them now, rather than just thinking, I'm not going to give up one of my very valuable support slots for a AAA piece, which is really usually not that good. But by making them vehicles and cheap, they become quite a nice way of just sort of adding extra mass to your anti-air fire, and are quite good for securing your flanks against helicopters. And of course, just simply the player suppression effect of just seeing, oh hey, I launched an air attack on this point, holy shit, that's a lot of AA fire, can't be dismissed. And F-111C getting in, wiping out the forces here, Jesus. However, these AMXs end up actually they almost move forward to take out our last command tank here, but one of them ends up actually getting killed by friendly artillery, and the rest of them get killed by these T-80s. So close, yet so far. Boom, there we go. But yeah, a very nice match, well played by Daywalker and Slexer. They've adapted really fast to the changes that we've made, and they've been ultra helpful in identifying some problem spots that we've got with the mod. Like, for instance, we were probably a little bit too lenient with the Chieftain Mark IIs. That'll be getting a drumming with a Nerf bat. And another thing of which they've pointed out to us is just simply the problem of mixed decks. Like, there's a few tanks and other items that we've made really nice, with the idea of making them for national decks, but not for sort of mixed decks. So rather than play mixed deck prototyping whack-a-mole for the next few months, I'm just going to go fuck it and try to just get them removed. Don't worry, we'll also include instructions on how to back up your decks, so for the normal game, you're okay. So yeah, as you can see, we won a nice little match. And yeah, hope you've had a good time watching. Until next time.